use the time for the announcements. I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to alert you to things that are coming down the pike. On Wednesday, the 1st of February, we're going to interview with a historian, Talbot Imlay, talk about his new book, Clarence Strike, the 20th Century American Internationalism. On Wednesday, the 8th, the conversation with Gentry O. Smith, who is the Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. You know DSS well, they keep ambassadors like him safe. And then on Thursday, on 9 February, a Rethinking Diplomacy series with Ambassador Robert Blake. You can't swing a dead cat here without hitting an ambassador of some sort. But thank you all for coming, and thank you especially, Gordon, Ambassador Sondland, for coming. Ambassador Sondland is known to us all as one who went socially viral on social media with your picture. I might want to get a camera shot of you and me with you doing your famous smile into the camera. It's classic. But we knew you before. You've been a friend of Duke for a while, and you also came to, this is your second AGS event. I don't know if you remember, but you came and talked to us about what the EU ambassador does. And I will say it didn't foreshadow all that that happened. So that's what we're going to talk to you about today. But in case you didn't know, Ambassador Sondland has a very successful career in the hotel business. And I gathered some big news just in December in that very space. So you continue to be very successful there. But you've also been very active in the politics side of things. And then, of course, in 2016, you famously backed not Trump, and then backed Trump, and then became ambassador to EU. And so we're going to explore all of that. But first, just thanks for coming to Duke.
Peter, it only for you. But I come here. Peter is, first among many professors that I've encountered around the country at various schools, because he really approaches everything with sort of I call it an honest count. He's not a bitterly partisan person in either direction. And I would wish I were many years younger so I could actually take one of his classes, because he's the kind of professor I always dreamed of having.
Well, that's very kind of you. You share something in common with many of these people I'm looking out in the audience. You've received my notes on your written work. So you shared your book with me in advance, and they're triggered. Some of them
I got a C.
Some of them are triggered by that. But it's a gripping read, and I hope you all will sign up to buy copies of it if you haven't already. I'm going to ask you to begin where you begin with the prologue, because you have this incredible anecdote that you open the book with that captures really a lot. So just tell that anecdote if you would.
Well, the anecdote was designed to sort of frame how President Trump operated, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We had a situation where the Romanians were in charge of the European Council. As most of you know, that rotates every 6 months. And so I sort of made it my mission to get close to the country that was running the council, thinking that whoever has the gavel can help us. So I sort of sidled up to the Romanians through their ambassador, got to meet their president, traveled to Bucharest. We hit it off. His name is Klaus Johannes. He's still the president. And I said, Klaus, you've got to come meet President Trump. You guys had hit it off famously. So I helped organize an invitation. Johannes shows up at the White House. And of course, and this is something I was criticized for a lot, I'm one of these people who believe you got to be there. You don't do these things by phone. You don't trust other people. You got to show up. So I got on a plane knowing Johannes was coming. Of course, the bilateral ambassador to Romania came as well, which was his job. It wasn't my job to be there, but I wanted to make sure that this was going to go well. So I show up, and I'm scheduled to brief Trump along with the bilateral ambassador on who this guy is and what does Romania want. And I walk to the Oval Office and I hear this loud music blaring in the Oval Office. What the hell is going on in there? And Trump is sitting behind his desk with a bunch of young aides, and they're listening to really loud music. And they're hunched over a little laptop. And he sees me standing at the door and he goes, "Come in, we're picking songs for my next rally, the walk-on song." What? He goes, "Which one do you like?" And he's pushing the buttons. I don't like any of them. He goes, "Oh, get out of here." You know, really frustrated that I wouldn't. I said, "The president of Romania is showing up very soon. Don't you want a briefing?" He said, "I'll get to the briefing." So I stood there and watched while they picked songs. And finally they finished. And now we don't have any time for a briefing. Now we're walking to the treaty room to greet Johannes, who's pulling up in a motorcade any minute. And on the walk, Trump is saying, "So how do you pronounce this guy's name? Ioannis?" I said, no, Johannes. Okay, Johannes. "When did I last meet him?" "I think you met him a couple of years ago, and this is what happened." He said, "Okay, got it." So we get to the treaty room, and I'm standing in the middle of the room with Trump alone. All the aides that had accompanied us are all sort of plastered to the wall, wanting to stay as far away as possible. Everyone's always nervous. And I'm standing there and Trump's kind of shifting around. He kind of has a little bit of attention deficit disorder. And he reaches in his pocket and he grabs a box of Tic Tacs and he shakes the box into his hand and scarfs down, I don't know, 6 or 8 Tic Tacs, puts the box back in his pocket. And I look at him and I go, "What the fuck?" And he goes, "What?" I said, "Aren't you going to share?" So he kind of gives me this disgusted look and pulls the Tic Tacs back out and gives me some Tic Tacs. And the look on the aides' faces on the surrounding us was priceless. Did you just say "what the fuck" to the president of the United States? I could just see the look. So Johannes comes in.
Not the first time he's heard it, probably.
No, or said it. So the Johannes comes in, they have their greeting, shakes hands, turns and sees me standing there. "Oh, Gordon, thanks for coming. You came all the way just for my thank you. So Trump says, "So you know one another?" And President Johannes says, "Yes, your ambassador has been very persistent. He's great. He's really moving your agenda forward with us." And Trump said, He said, "You know, he's in the hotel business just like me. He's not as successful as I am, but he's in the hotel business too." So as we're walking toward the Oval or toward the cabinet room for the briefing, he and Johannes are walking together and Johannes turns around and goes, it's just priceless. Anyway, that was the opening of the book.
Okay, there's lots of threads there to pull. The one I'm going to pull is the one of political ambassador versus career ambassador. So I remember talking to you when you were considering, among a number of—
This is all your fault, by the way.
Yes, that's
Everything that's happened to me since 2017 is on you.
I'm just remembering if you had taken the Belgian ambassadorship like we talked about, things would have gone differently. No, but you were in a position to have opportunities to serve in the administration. But as you know, and as we all know, because we hear from career ambassadors, the United States is one of the few places that uses political ambassadors in these roles. And there's an argument about the pros and cons. So talk to me from your perspective about the pros and cons. This is a central theme of your book. Let's develop that theme.
Well, I'm a huge advocate of political ambassadors, and that may sound self-serving, but I can't imagine for a minute how anyone could do the job I had as a career ambassador. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, the anecdote that I just relayed to you would have never happened with a career ambassador. Career ambassador would never have even gone back to the White House for this meeting. They would have never met President Johannes. They wouldn't have done anything of the kind. They might have met the Romanian ambassador to the EU, sent a cable, and watched on television like everyone else to see how things went. They don't have the ability to, if you will, skip the line and go to the decision maker. And that's the biggest benefit of being a political appointee. There are a lot of drawbacks to being a political appointee. Political appointees very seldom are subject matter experts. There are people who spent their careers in the Foreign Service that know the particular country or association, chapter and verse. But the downside is they're usually not deal makers. They're bureaucrats. So when you can pair up someone, and I don't say necessarily me, but anyone who has successfully navigated the private sector in whatever they did, and you can pair that up with a subject matter expert, you have the best of both worlds, because you have the brains and you also have, to use a Yiddish word, the chutzpah, to get done what needs to get done. So I'm a huge believer in political appointees. The press routinely criticizes both sides of the aisle, more Republicans than Democrats, because the Republicans tend to give more money to become ambassadors than the Democrats do. But they really criticize political appointees. And frankly, the most effective ambassadors I've seen have been smart political appointees who are not doing it for the perks or the housing or the transportation, because most of them, frankly, live better lives back home than they do abroad. They're doing it because they really do want to serve their country. They want to serve for a period of time and get back to their real life, their job, whatever it may be.
Well, okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate and challenge you a little
Of course you are.
Okay. Would you, in the hotel business, would you hire someone who was successful, say, as a professor, but had no background as a hotel thing, and give them a top senior level management position?
Is it you?
Yeah, well,
The answer is yes.
Okay.
You know, that analogy is thrown out a lot, but you have to understand a little bit about what makes an embassy tick. Every administration starts with a blank sheet of paper, okay? There are pre-existing relationships with countries, or with, in the case of the EU, with an association like the EU. But it really is incumbent on whoever the president is, Republican or Democrat, to set the agenda as to what his or her foreign policy is going to be. And an ambassador has to have a lot of creativity. Again, the subject matter expert is sitting there in the form of a deputy chief of mission, in the form of minister counselors from every single discipline, whether it's commerce, agriculture, defense, intelligence, you name it. I've got so many smart people there. So when you need to have specific information, it's literally a phone call away. It's down the hall. They come to your office. You can drill down on a subject. But then how to take that information and package it in a way that advances the country, our country's desires within a country, within an association, is best pursued usually by someone who can operate outside of the box. And in a private company, you kind of can operate outside of the box from the get-go. You don't have the same constraints as you do if you're a member of the diplomatic corps, because as you probably know, career ambassadors, it's very much like a lot of things like the military, like a law firm. It's an up or out system. You either continue to progress up the chain of command, and they have a very similar chain of command to the military. In fact, an ambassador is considered either a 3 or a 4-star general, admiral, depending on whether they're a career or political appointee. And they start.
which is higher?
Which is higher?
Yeah, which gets 4 and which gets 3?
Yes.
Yes. No, I know.
No. Guess. It's counterintuitive.
It would be the career that should.
The career gets 4,
Exactly.
the political gets 3.
Yes,
Exactly.
that's what I would guess.
Yeah.
Yes, but
That's why you're a professor.
yes, but the other thing that the political doesn't know how an embassy functions and what it can and cannot do on the one hand, and how the State Department, which is a very odd beast, functions and what it can and cannot do and how it plugs into the interagency. So talk about the learning curve for a political ambassador on that.
Well, that's true. And they put all incoming political appointees through something called charm school. which is less about learning to be charming and more about learning exactly what you point out, which is how does the State Department work? What is expected of you? How do you deal with these career folks? How do you deal with your interlocutors on the other side? And what it really gives you is sort of an executive summary of the box in which you're playing. And then, depending on whether you're a political appointee or a career ambassador, depends on how far outside the lines you can color. The most precious commodity that any administration has, Republican or Democrat, is time. The stopwatch is clicked the minute you take the oath of office. And when I say you, I mean the president, but everyone below the president who is a political appointee who is essentially signed on to that person's agenda and wants to make the things that that person promised the electorate who elected him or her to make them happen, they've got 4 years. And it's a really short period of time. So political appointees think in terms of every day that goes by that you didn't move the needle on the agenda is a bad day, because there's less days left in the administration. You can never count on being reelected, as President Trump wasn't, and so on. So this is where political appointees really try to basically circumvent the process and get to the point, get to the punchline, which of course the career folks hate. They just hate it. There are other anecdotes in the book talking about this. I don't know if you want me to give one.
Tell one of them. Tell one of them. Yeah.
So this told me everything I needed to know about my new job. I'm there only a few days. I have what's called a country meeting, a team meeting. There are about 40 people in the meeting, huge group, and they're the heads of all the various departments in the mission. And they're going around giving me a briefing, and I'm reading the notebook, and I'm thinking to myself, this is all nice and important, but we have something coming up in 2 weeks that's critical. President Jean-Claude Juncker, who was the president of the European Commission at the time, was headed to the White House to meet with President Trump on trade. And as you know, at the time, Ambassador Bob Lighthizer was our US trade representative, and he was making a lot of noises about putting tariffs on the EU because they weren't cooperating with us on various trade matters, and he wanted to get their attention. So this was a critical thing, and no one was raising it. I mean, it was sort of on a long list. And I'm thinking, but this meeting is a really important meeting, and it's literally going to happen within, I think it was within 13, 14 days when we were all sitting there. So finally, I listened patiently, which for me is about 15 or 20 minutes. And I said, okay, what about the Juncker meeting? Well, that's being handled by the NSC and by this and by that. I said, no. I want to see Juncker. I want to talk to him before he heads to Washington. And then I got the most condescending look I've ever got from a bunch of the staff. They said, sir, I always call you sir. Sir kind of means fuck you. So, but sir, you're an ambassador. You meet with other ambassadors. President Juncker is a president. He meets with other presidents. And I said, well, that's true. I'm an ambassador, but I'm not any ambassador. I'm the ambassador of the United States of America. And we don't all come in the same shape and size. I said, I find it impossible to believe that if you ask for a meeting for the ambassador, it's not about Gordon Sondland. Nobody cares about me. It's about the position and the office, that President Juncker would turn down such a meeting. Well, sir, it's not done. I said, well, do me a favor. I'd like to see him tomorrow at 4 o'clock. The looks, it was like the look I got when the people heard about the Tic Tacs. I mean, it was incredible. So I go back to my office when the meeting is over and I'm working on something, and an aide comes and knocks on the door. Sir, I have bad news. President Juncker cannot see you at 4 o'clock. He can see you at 3 o'clock. Okay. Couldn't believe I got the meeting. So then all of a sudden, the mission is now swinging into action. I mean, there are people running around, there are papers being prepared. And I asked my DCM, what is going on? Oh, sir, we have to brief you. We're shocked you got this meeting. This is highly unusual. And I'm looking at what is so unusual? I'm the ambassador of the US. He's coming to Washington. I would think he would want to talk to me too. Sir, you just don't understand. Okay. So I said, I'm going to go tomorrow and see him. No, sir. It doesn't work that way. I said, what do you mean it doesn't work that way? We're going to have a Zoom call? I said, I want to go. No, sir, you're going to see him in person, but you have to take a delegation. And there's going to be a formal meeting. There'll be a big table with little flags on it. And you're going to sit and he's going to sit across the table and you're going to take 6 people from here and he's going to bring 6 people. We'll have your talking points. I said, I don't want to do that. I just want to talk to the guy. Sir, that's not how it's done. I'm sorry. And then now it's almost condescending. So I have to do the way they want to do it. So I put on the next day my best ambassador suit, much darker than this one. And I do the motorcade and we go to Berlaymont, which is the building where the European Commission is housed. And it's all very formal and there's a protocol guy to greet me. And we walk in and I'm told, by the way, in my briefing, you're to walk forward. He will come at you from another direction. You'll pause in front of the EU backdrop. You'll turn, the photographers will take your picture, and then you'll adjourn to the meeting. So as we're walking toward each other, and Juncker was known as a major smoker and drinker and just a hell of a good guy. That's just what I read about him. So he's probably, I don't know, 20 feet away. And I see him coming and, oh, I'm supposed to address him as Mr. President. He's supposed to address me as Mr. Ambassador. So as he's pulling up, coming closer to me, I go, Jean-Claude. And he looks at me for a moment. He goes, Gordon. And we meet in front of this backdrop. He gives me a big hug and a kiss. He's a kisser, both cheeks. And he rubs my tummy. And we take the picture, and there's a picture of him rubbing my tummy, actually, that's out in the media. And I said, Jean-Claude, this was so, I never called him Mr. President. I said, this was so nice of you to do this on such short notice. I know how busy you are. Is there any way maybe you and I could spend a minute or two alone before we meet? He says, of course, come in my office. And he turns to all, there's 20 or 30 people. He says, you all have cookies and coffee. We'll be with you in a minute. So he takes me in his office, shuts the door, takes off his shoes. Do you mind if I smoke? I go, Jean-Claude, it's your office. Smoke, go ahead. Lights up a Camel, puts his feet up on the ottoman, and we sit there for probably an hour and a half going through the whole litany. And we had a few little, tense words about trade and about Trump and about, but it was a great meeting. I got everything I needed to know. I told him exactly what he needed to do and needed not to do in order not to piss Trump off and get tariffs imposed immediately. He appreciated it. We exchanged cell numbers. We came back out. The bureaucracies of both the EU and the US were pissed off like to no end because they were completely excluded from this conversation. And the rest is history. We got to the White House 2 weeks later and had a very interesting meeting.
I'm gonna ask one more.
Is that too long?
No. That captures, I think, it vividly. I would love to interview the staff to get their angle on it. But you were choosing between a series of posts. This one was the one that attracted you the most. Explain to me why the ambassador to EU attracted you as a opportunity. It might be considered a little bit more obscure than some of the other posts that political ambassadors end up at.
Well, first of all, I was shocked and honored to have even been considered for it. I mean, it was so punching so far above where I thought I would land. I thought maybe I'd get an ambassadorship to Malta or the Bahamas or maybe Luxembourg or, somewhere where they could park me, an inexperienced, fledgling diplomat, And here I'm being placed in one of the most consequential posts in the US Foreign Service. And what I found out much later was Trump remembered a conversation that we had when I first reconnected with him. And I have to digress
That's coming next. So I'm going to tell that story next.
about the meeting at Trump Tower.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he had remembered a conversation, which we're going to talk about next. And he decided, you're just the kind of personality we need in the EU to agitate them a little bit into some action. Because what he was lamenting was that whether it was Bush, Obama, Clinton, any of them, they'd had all these great meetings with the European Union. Everyone would smile. The canapes were delicious, but nothing ever happened. It was just one meeting to the next. And he wanted someone to really, pardon the pun, break some china over there. And he thought, based on one meeting he had with me, that I might just be the person to do that. So that's why I was offered this position.
Okay. So let me pull back and talk about your relationship with President Trump, but also your views of President Trump at the time. So you were not in it to win it with him from the very, very beginning. There you had a break along the way. So talk about that, and then also about your meeting with him.
Well, I started supporting Republican candidates at a very young age. I worked as a volunteer for George H.W. Bush. I did some advance work. I did some volunteer driving, all of the things you do sort of as a young, up-and-coming person who wants to participate in party politics. And both Democrats and Republicans do the same thing. Then President George W. Bush got into office. I helped him on his campaign. I raised money. I contributed. I wasn't in a position in my life then, had I been offered an ambassadorship, to accept it, nor would I have been offered an ambassadorship. It was too soon. I was too young, and I hadn't really sort of made my bones yet in the party. But I was offered a position on the Commission for White House Fellows, which is a presidential appointment, which was very interesting. And I served on that for a couple of years and was very fulfilling. And then, of course, I supported John McCain. He didn't make it. I supported Mitt Romney. He didn't make it. I supported Jeb Bush from the very beginning when he decided to run. He didn't make it. And then I decided to wait until our party had a nominee. And that turned out to be Donald Trump. Wasn't my first, second, third, fourth choice. But, when you're up to bat, you have to swing. You just don't get multiple opportunities. And I wanted to serve in this capacity. So when Trump became the presumptive nominee, the people who were running the finance committee for Trump wisely looked out to see who was raising money for all of the competitive candidates. And I was one of the top fundraisers for Jeb. So they called and said, "Would you like to meet Donald?" And I said, "Sure." I flew to New York. We had an appointment. I went into his office in Trump Tower. He said, "Have we ever met before?" And I said, "Yes, we met briefly in 1988 at the Republican, at the the nomination of George H.W. Bush in New Orleans." And I said, "When we met, the only time we met, you were a real dick to me." And he looked at me and he said, "I was? What did I do?" And I said, "Well," I said, "I was in the lobby of the Marriott. You were standing there all by yourself. You had just bought the Plaza Hotel in New York. I had bought a hotel managed by the same company in Portland, Oregon. And I said, I read about how you were being taken advantage of by the company who was running your hotel. And I said, we were also similarly being taken advantage of. And we were thinking of litigating. And so I wanted to compare notes with you to see maybe we could team up since we had kind of the same issues." And I said, "You completely wrote me off. You wouldn't even engage with me. You were very dismissive." And then the next day I'm sitting in the bar talking to some people, that one of whom brought me to the New Orleans. And you made a beeline, you sat down, and you couldn't have been nicer. You were talking to me. You remembered the night before when we met in the elevator. And he said, well, of course I was nice to you the next night because you were with very important people. And I said, who says something like that? And he kind of laughed and he said, well, are you over it? And I said, well, I'm here, aren't I? He said, yeah, good point. Okay. And that's how we,
Okay,
we
but
connected.
it would be human to say, I don't trust this guy, or I don't like this guy. So, and you're linking yourself and your name and your fortunes to this guy. So talk a little about that.
That's a difficult one because the other people that I supported and would have proudly served under President George W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, Jeb Bush, I would have had a far more personal connection that would have been more meaningful to me. Donald Trump, for me, was a vehicle to do a job I always wanted to do. It really wasn't about Donald Trump. It was about serving our country, moving policies that I largely agreed with. If you separate the policies from the person, the personality was difficult. The policies, which weren't all developed by him, but were developed by senior White House leadership, the National Security Council, senior members of Congress that had influence at the White House. And I agreed with a lot of those policies, particularly as they applied to my job. So I had a difficult decision. Do I hate this guy enough? And remember, this is now 2017. This is before the January 6th situation. This is before a lot of things happen. Do I hate this guy enough that I'm willing to say I'm going to pass and wait for the next Republican to get into office that will also give me a job for whom I feel like I want to serve? I'm now 60 years old. I'm now 65, but I was 60 at the time. What are the odds? And the odds are very low. So it's like I said a minute ago, when you're up to bat, you got to swing.
I'm going to still push you a little bit harder on this point, because as you know, there were others of us who similarly had backed all of those other Republicans, including I've been with him. You can track fortunes of people by when I endorsed them, and then about a week after they. But then when it came to Trump, no, we're not going to go there. That doesn't mean that we're changing teams, but we're not going to go that far. So talk about the calculation between the folks who were in that camp. They became known as the Never Trumpers. They weren't necessarily Never Trumpers. They were not going to vote for Trump, versus you, who had supported all the others, but said, no, I can keep going. They still saw things that bothered them, right? That to include his preparation and treatment of women and so forth. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
I was never double negative. I was never a Never Trumper, and I was not a pro-Trumper. I viewed him through a fairly pragmatic and sober lens. And I also, when it came to my job and to foreign policy, to the extent that I had any influence, I wasn't intimidated or afraid of him because I didn't need the job. I wasn't interested in a further career. I wasn't going to go to work someday for the Trump organization. So when I thought he was full of shit, I told him so as president of the United States. I did it respectfully. I did it one-on-one when there was no one else around, so as to not embarrass him in front of others. And he generally responded positively, not that he agreed with me, but he appreciated the candor. So I felt that he was someone that I could manage to the point of being able to objectively move some of the trade policies, some of the defense policies, agriculture, the things that we really needed to get going with the EU, which now a lot of them have been sidelined because of Ukraine. I felt like I could do an honest job of it. Was he my favorite president? No, by no means. And I never professed that he was.
So another category of person that you distinguished yourself from was those who joined the administration and maybe to put a hand on the wheel and a foot on the brake. They were sometimes called the adults in the room, if you will. And they were there to shape the president's agenda and maybe to stop him from doing things that they thought were dangerous. And there's a number of folks who served at your level and above who probably fit that category, but you didn't fall into that category necessarily.
Well, my own personal experience in the meetings in which I was included, meetings that I insisted on being included in, whether I was included or not, because that administration was a lot of stick up for yourself. I just showed up and insisted to be let in and have a voice at the table, which again, a career could never do that in a million years. And I spent a lot of time in Washington because frankly, being in Brussels was less productive for me than being in Washington in front of the decision makers so that I could go back to Brussels and really deliver the beginning of a negotiation that was already stamped and approved by the decision makers instead of going through all of these layers. So to get back to your original point, I didn't personally notice anything that I felt was untoward or illegal. I felt some of the policy I didn't agree with, and I would salute smartly and execute. If I couldn't do that, I would have resigned. I would have said, I can't carry this policy out in good conscience. But nothing came to my in basket that I felt that way about. And I still don't today.
Okay. We're coming closer, inching closer and closer to Zelensky. We're going to get there. But I want to ask one more question about the Trump experience in general. Every administration is harshly criticized in the press, and every administration is described as incompetent, bumbling, etc. But when you talk to folks inside, whether it's the Obama administration, the Bush administration, Clinton, or even today, the Biden people, you talk to people inside, they'll say, yeah, there's problems, but it's better than the press is looking at. Was that your experience in the Trump administration, that, yeah, it's better than people on the outside were saying? Or was it as bad as people on the outside were saying, or worse?
No, it was much better, actually.
Aha.
We had a lot of difficult personalities with whom to deal. During my tenure, John Bolton ran the NSC, and John Bolton was very problematic in many ways. He's very smart.
Yes.
I know he's been here. He's a very interesting character, but he had his own agenda, and his agenda kept coming into conflict with the president's agenda. And he needed to be reminded constantly, not by me, but by others, your name wasn't on the ballot. You're an advisor. That's in your title, National Security Advisor. You're not the president of the United States. And he had to be reminded of that. Frankly, it reminds me of something Richard Nixon was quoted as saying about Kissinger many years ago. Sometimes you have to kick Henry in the balls to remind him who's president. And I think the Bolton analogy, or the analogy, works with Bolton. But no, I think that a lot of policy was executed deftly, quickly. A lot of it didn't make the media, and what did make the media was either downplayed if it was beneficial. If it was not beneficial, it was the next disaster, that the country is under complete siege. So no, I think we did well in many respects. Did we have problems? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, you're one of a kind in many respects, but you're one of a kind on that question, because I've asked that question to many Trump administration officials, and to a person, they said, no, it was worse. You're the first one to say that it was better. I'm not saying that there was nothing to defend, but that the policy process behind the scene, the sausage making, was more difficult to watch for those who are inside than it looked to those of us on the outside.
Well, I'll tell you why it was difficult to watch. It was difficult to watch if you were a sausage maker that wanted to be involved in every aspect of the sausage process. If you were satisfied to stand at the beginning of the machine when the sausage ingredients go in, and then run down to the other end of the machine where the finished sausage comes out in a package, and you didn't need to have your own imprint all the way along. What came out the other end wasn't bad. It was very edible. But there were too many people in the administration that just couldn't let go. I mean, what I did with Juncker that I described, yes, it's a little humorous, but it's sort of a microcosm of the way Trump did business. I'm reminded of something that happened not too long ago in the Biden administration. If you all recall, the Biden administration decided to take a project away from France with the Australians, the submarines. The Australians had signed a contract with the French to build submarines. And the Biden administration wisely, and I commend the Biden administration for this, said, you don't want to take delivery of a submarine. You're one of our closest allies. You're in a strategic part of the world. You want the best submarine you can get your hands on, and it ain't the French submarine, which is an old diesel submarine many generations back in terms of its technology. You want ours. The problem was the deal was already made. So I remember clearly the day that broke, that story. And it was like a Monday or a Tuesday. And President Biden's people said, yes, President Macron is very upset about this. And President Biden is planning to speak to him next Tuesday. So a week later, he was going to be speaking with President Macron. And I know why he was going to speak with President Macron a week later. Because A, they were going to do damage control. B, they were going to figure out what to do to placate Macron. Biden was going to have to get a lot of briefings before any of his staff would let him on the phone with Macron to make sure he didn't screw something up. And that's just how that machine works. Trump, on the other hand, I can tell you exactly how it would have gone. Someone would have walked into the Oval and said, Mr. President, President Macron is pissed off because we took the submarine deal away. He said, oh, okay. How much did we take away? 90 billion. Huh. What do we give France every year? And he would have gone through a 2 to 3 minute analysis. Okay, what's his phone number? We picked up his phone, called Macron directly. Emmanuel, Donald, I hear you're pissed off about the submarine. Listen, before you go any further, you and I are allies. We make great submarines. Yours, not so good. It's okay. You're going to get there. But right now, we're going to sell submarines to the Australians, and they're going to get the best. We'll involve some French companies if it helps. And I'm going to make this up to you. I promise. And here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you that. I'm going to do. Don't worry about it. We're friends. I love you, but that's the deal. And that would have been the end of the conversation. And I'm being a little bit, there's a little hyperbole here, but I'm not far off. Now think of all the people that conversation would have cut out of the process. And those are the people who are sitting here telling you it's much worse.
Okay. It's true. I haven't asked President Trump this, so maybe he would say that. But what I heard you say was that he would have found a way to make a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Ukraine. So
I just want you to know I had a quid pro quo today. I went to Starbucks. They gave me a cup of coffee and I gave them my Amex card and we had a quid pro quo. That's what that is.
Okay. So, but let's talk about, because these threads come together in this story and the threads are President Trump's unusual style. Secondly, the 2 points you made about wanting to cut corners to be quick and being willing to color outside the lines. You bring those 3 threads together, and that's sort of the tapestry that produces the Ukraine story. So tell your version of the Ukraine story, or at least the setup, and then we'll go piece by piece.
Well, I don't have a version. What I have is exactly what my role and my experience was. I can't really speak to what happened on calls in which I didn't participate or meetings in which I didn't participate, nor would I want to. I can tell you that from the very beginning of my service, the career staff who briefed me came in with a big fat binder with all of the issues that are facing the EU mission. And they included a lot of the things we talked about today, but they also included Ukraine. And one of the first things I said was, well, you know, I did my homework on the EU. Ukraine's not a member of the EU. Why am I dealing with this? And they said, well, Mr. Ambassador, the reason you're dealing with Ukraine is because it's vital that the US and the EU have no daylight between them when it comes to dealings with Ukraine, because together we need to protect Ukraine from Russia. That's a very simplistic explanation, but it resonated. And one of the first meetings that they set up for me was with the foreign minister of Ukraine, Pavlo Klimkin, who was the foreign minister under Poroshenko, who was the president just prior to Zelensky. And Klimkin came in, and when he came in, I could tell it wasn't an unusual meeting for him to meet with the US ambassador to the EU. He kind of felt that this was his home to be with us. And he said, you know, one of the problems we're having is we're having trouble getting foreign investment. We keep getting turned down for deals. Our bonds suck. And he went through the litany. And I said, well, Pavlo, I said, I don't know enough about it yet. I'm going to do some homework. But I said, how many American, you know, investment banks have you involved in some of these decisions? Because it's really not, what do I think? What does President Trump think? What does the US think? There's nothing to do with that. It's what does Wall Street think? If you want to attract capital, you got to make Wall Street happy because they direct the capital. And if they think you're crooked, you're not going to get any capital. If they think all the board members of all of these Ukrainian companies are cronies or friends, I didn't say Hunter Biden, you're not going to get capital. So I'm not going to get in the way of this. You should call B of A, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, get them to come to Kiev. They'll come at the drop of a hat and ask them what you need to do. What board members do you need to put on these companies? What things do you need to do in your, you know, currency system to clean things up? Because they'll tell you they want to do business. So he liked that. And, you know, he went back and got to it. So that was the very beginning of my Ukraine.
Just, but a quick question. You could have filled your plate, your time with a myriad of issues. What made you think this is the one I can move the needle on? Because it's quite clear that you wanted to get things done, but there's many things you could have gotten things done with. What made you say, this is the one I think I can get the things done with?
Well, part of the ability to get things done is if the other side of the table also wants to get things done. There are a lot of things that I wanted to do with Germany, with France. They had no interest in doing. Ukraine really wanted to get closer to the United States. So the first thing I did after a couple of meetings with various Ukrainian officials was I got the EU Secretary General in, Jean-Claude Belliard, and I said, tell me where you guys are on Ukraine. What are you doing? And he said, I agree with you completely. We're not nearly as in sync with you as we should be. And that's when we hatched this plan to go to Ukraine, give a speech on the deck of the destroyer that was parked there. The Russians heard the whole speech. We said, we rehearsed this really well on the way up there. There's no daylight. Russia's not going to take any more. You know, Poroshenko and whoever wins the next election. I mean, we did everything we could to make it clear to the Russians, nothing's going to happen to Ukraine. And the EU was great. Had I gone up there alone and done that, the Russians would have gone. But with the EU together, that scared the shit out of the Russians. And the intelligence that came back afterwards confirmed it.
Okay, at some point you figure out that that it's not going to be enough to get them to Wall Street. There's a presidential piece as well. So talk a little bit about how you found out about what Trump wanted and how that enters the equation.
Well, the conventional wisdom was that, you know, Trump was a bull in a china shop. He was, you know, given the cold shoulder by all the foreign leaders. And I think there was a little bit of that, but I can tell you every foreign leader with whom I interacted wanted to talk to him, wanted to meet with him. wanted an Oval Office visit. They all wanted it. And Ukraine was no different. Poroshenko wanted to meet with him. And once Zelensky was inaugurated, Zelensky wanted to meet with him. And after having met Zelensky and spending the day with him, we all came to the conclusion. I went up there with a small delegation with Rick Perry, the Secretary of Energy, Senator Johnson, a couple of other people. And we spent the day with Zelensky and we decided, you know, Trump and Zelensky are really going to hit it off. Zelensky is funny. He's smart. I had no idea what a brave guy he was because he didn't need to prove it at the time. But we thought that once he and Trump have a few minutes together, they'll hit it off and all of a sudden Trump will get more interested in Ukraine and in helping Ukraine and so on and so forth. Because Trump is a very sort of intuitive kind of a person, like most real estate developers are. That's how they make their living. So all we were trying to do was something very simple. Just come to Washington, sit down, no preconditions, no quid pro quos, no nothing, just have a meeting. And that's when this whole thing got derailed.
Now, and just to be clear, an ambassador trying to get an Oval Office meeting for someone in their neighborhood, and you weren't the ambassador to Ukraine, but nevertheless, trying to get an Oval Office meeting, that's pretty close to standard operating procedures for an ambassador, right? That's what they do all day. And the White House's job is to say, no, we can't, president's time is too precious.
Exactly.
So you're trying to beat down the door to get on the calendar to do this, which you say you have to do that from DC, not from Brussels.
Well, I can tell you unequivocally, Bolton was the one who was blocking it. And had Bolton said, yeah, this is a good idea, the ambassador to the EU, a senior senator in the US Senate on the Foreign Relations Committee, and the Secretary of Energy, who used to be a governor, have met this guy, and they all think that, and they all know Trump well, they think Trump and this guy would get along. We don't have to have an agenda. We don't have to make any promises. We just have to have a meeting. But Bolton, in his infinite wisdom, who hadn't even met him yet, Zelensky, said no and blocked it. So we had to do the normal Bolton circumvention, in which we were not successful.
And explain that. What do you mean by the Bolton circumvention?
Well, Bolton blocked a lot of meetings that various ambassadors around the world wanted to have. And Bolton always used the excuse you gave, which is doesn't have time, too busy. That's bullshit. He had plenty of time.
Because I almost want to follow that, because President Trump had plenty of time, or because every president has plenty of time?
President Trump had plenty of time.
Okay. So you circumvent Bolton, but that means going to the White House, going behind,
Going to Trump.
right, okay.
And saying, and in this case, we struck out because Trump was in a nasty mood. We had just come from the inauguration of Zelensky. We were all excited about the kind of person he was. He was very different than Poroshenko, who was sort of an old school oligarch, part of the problem, very corrupt, nice guy, but corrupt. Zelensky was different. Zelensky sold his business. He was in the media business. He had Ukrainian level fuck you money, not US level fuck you money, but you know, he made 30, 40, $50 million, which is a lot of money in Ukraine. So he didn't need the job. He had independence, great family, nice wife. He had all the right ingredients to be a successful leader. And I mean, now with 2020 hindsight, we see how successful he really has been. I mean, how many leaders would stay and fight and risk death as opposed to getting on their jet and going to Switzerland and living, you know, off of their Swiss bank account? Not Zelensky.
Okay, so I'm with you in trying to get at a meeting with the president. You're with the president, and he says, I'll tell you how we can get a meeting.
No, he didn't. What he said was, I don't want to talk about Ukraine. They're all corrupt. They're all this, they're all that. I said, no, wait a minute. You just sent us to Ukraine. We went and met this guy. At least listen. Okay, what? So Johnson and Perry and everyone is trying, and Kurt Volker was with us. I forgot to mention Kurt. He was a very important part of this. And no one could get through. He goes, I don't want to, you know what? Rudy Giuliani is dealing with stuff in Ukraine. Why don't you talk to him? And I said, why are we talking to Rudy Giuliani? He's not in the administration. He's your lawyer. I know, but just deal with Rudy. So something else was going on that day. It was just a bad day. And he was distracted, Trump. So we walk out of the White House and we go, what the hell, Rudy? Why are we dealing with Rudy? He's a disaster. And one of the guys, I think it was Volker or Perry, said, I know Rudy pretty well. I didn't know Rudy at all. Not at all. And of course, Bolton said I was cooking up some deal with Rudy. I didn't even know Rudy. Never talked to him, never met him. I don't know how I could cook something up with someone I'd never even met. So they called Rudy and Rudy said, yeah, I'm working on some stuff for the president. Well, we just want to get a meeting. What does he want? And it started very simply. He said, well, the Ukrainians under Poroshenko had an investigation going into corruption generally in the country. They had a broad-based investigation going on. Burisma, this, that, there were lots of things going. That investigation was shut down under Poroshenko by some oligarch who told Poroshenko, stop investigating. You're getting too close to my bank account. That's me speculating. So all the president wants is for that investigation to be restarted again, as Zelensky had campaigned, because Zelensky campaigned on the fact that he was going to reinstitute investigations into corruption. So the president wants this investigation to be restarted. And once there's been an announcement that the investigations are being restarted, no mention was made of Biden, no mention was made of Burisma. It was all just about corruption in general. Then the president will invite Zelensky to the Oval Office. That was it. Okay, fair enough.
So it sounds plausible, except wouldn't it go off in your head and you say, why would the president care that much about that? I mean, wouldn't that set off your spidey sense tingling?
No, because we knew that he always had a chip on his shoulder about Hillary, something to do with her server. He thought her server was in Ukraine. I don't know where he came up with all of this, but he just had this sort of, I don't know, just sort of pissy mood about Ukraine. And it made sense when Rudy said the president, because he sort of said that to us in the Oval Office. It made sense when Rudy said the president thinks Ukraine is a cesspool. He doesn't want to meet Zelensky until they're back on the straight and narrow and they're starting to deal with corruption. Again, not any person, not any company, corruption writ large. So seemed very plausible. And we said, okay, great. We'll talk to the Ukrainians. And they immediately said, yes, we definitely will restart investigations because we campaigned on that. That's one of our campaign promises. So we're going to do that. What do you want? So one of the team got back to Rudy. What does he want? Well, he wants a press conference or an announcement, something where he's on record that he's going to restart the investigations. And that's where we lost control of it, because then every time we'd go back, there was something else included and another condition and another thing. Finally, we realized this was Rudy, not Trump at all. It was coming from Rudy.
And when does the aid kick? Not the aid.
The military aid.
Yeah, the military aid kick in.
As we were going through this process, and I was getting very frustrated because I only wanted one thing. I just wanted the meeting. That's it. You make an announcement, you're going to fulfill one of your campaign promises, and there'll be a meeting. That's it. And that's where I left it. And then all of a sudden, more things got included. And then finally, inexplicably, the military aid was cut off for about 5 weeks. I don't know who did it, who ordered it. No one ever talked to us about it. And then the Ukrainians said, what's going on? Are we now going to have to make this announcement before we get our military aid? And I said, I don't know. It sure looks like it. I'm speculating. I have no idea. I'm going to check because no one knows. In fact, I was in Warsaw with Vice President Pence at a meeting with Zelensky, and Zelensky asked Pence point blank, "Are you cutting off our military aid now before we make this announcement about the corruption?" And Pence said, "I don't know. I'm talking to the president later this afternoon. I'm going to check and find out and get back to you." Because no one knew. It just sort of happened.
And what's your view now about how that and why that happened?
I think that Trump was frustrated because I don't think he realized that Rudy independently was making this far more difficult than it needed to be. And Trump, I think, again, I'm speculating now. I don't know this for a fact because, again, I said I wouldn't talk about meetings I wasn't in or conversations I didn't have. So this is Gordon speculating that Trump was waiting for this announcement so he could have the meeting, which I think he signed off on that. And then I think Giuliani, for his own purposes, kept adding things to the equation. So finally, I bet you some aide walked into the Oval and said, "Routine military aid for Ukraine, please sign. It's already been approved. It's on its way. We've already sent some. We're sending more." And Trump said, "I'm not sending anything to those guys until this gets resolved." I think that's exactly what happened.
Okay. I know the answer to this question, but I want them to hear your answer. You don't view Trump's involvement in that issue as an impeachable offense.
I don't.
Explain why not. He was impeached for it, but
He was impeached for it.
why do you think Congress got it wrong? Or the House anyway got it wrong?
You know, as I've mentioned to you before in our one-on-one conversations, I view Trump's activities in two silos. Silo number one began the day he came down the escalator and announced that he was running for office, and it ended on January 5th. All of the things he did and said, some of which were reprehensible, some of which were fine, some of which could have been done more artfully, and everything in between, none of them I thought rose to the level of an impeachable offense. I thought they rose to the level of what I call a ballot box offense. You don't like what the guy said or did about, women, that you can do things to them when you're a celebrity, or, what you're going to do with Ukraine, or any of the things he did, which other presidents have done their own version of. Don't vote for him the next time. Throw him out of office, but don't impeach. If we're going to start impeaching people for things like that, we're going to have nonstop impeachments going on in Congress. January 6th, to me, was in a different category. January 6th, the one thing I did learn as the ambassador of the United States to the European Union was every country, if they look up to us for one thing, it's the way we transfer power, the way we hand over the keys, the ceremony, the substance as well as the form. The old person gets into the car with the new person, who they probably loathe one another, whoever it is, doesn't have anything to do with Trump, could be anybody. But they ride in the car together. They say nice things. They sit on the platform at the inauguration and smile, even though they go, "That mother." That the world looks at and sees that we don't transfer power at the point of a gun, violence. We turn the keys over. And then if we have the right to do so, we go and beat them at the ballot box the next time. Trump didn't do that. In fact, he did the opposite. And for that, I thought was an impeachable offense.
But help me understand why the following version would not be impeachable. Namely, if the president held military aid in abeyance, so until the president of another country or leader of another country conducted a witch hunt to get dirt on the son of his political rival. So why doesn't that mixture of partisan partisan activity, dirty tricks activity, and commander-in-chief powers, why doesn't that become impeachable?
I think it's reprehensible. I don't think it's impeachable. I think we need to save impeachment for a high crime and misdemeanor. And I think that what he did was not the right thing to do. Involving Giuliani wasn't the right thing to do. There are a whole bunch of things that if you rewind the tape on Ukraine, you would have done differently. I wish they had gone differently. I wouldn't be sitting here probably talking to you had they gone differently. But no, when I found out that the military aid had been held up, I went apeshit, and I couldn't get a straight answer out of anybody. I didn't talk to the president. I don't remember why. I don't know if I couldn't get through to him or if he didn't want to tell me or what, but I talked to Pompeo, I talked to everybody, and no one could give me a straight answer.
Okay, I've got two more questions, then we're going to go to the audience to take questions. My toughest question, and then a less tough question. The toughest question is, do you think that if it had been career ambassadors and not political ambassadors, they might have sussed this out and quelled it sooner, this being the Ukrainian imbroglio?
How would they have quelled it?
By leaking it more publicly earlier. I mean, in a sense, it was career people probably who did the whistleblower and all that stuff to shut it down.
I mean, look, had Trump, first of all, I honestly don't believe. If you read and parse the transcript of the call, where you have Zelensky agreeing with Trump on the call that, for example, Masha Yovanovitch, who I'm fond of, by the way, and I thought she did a good job as ambassador. I don't know why she and Trump got sideways. But you read Zelensky's own words in that call. Zelensky didn't like her either and wanted her gone. And, there's a thing called agrément.
Right.
And does everyone know what agrément is? So when you become an ambassador and you're appointed, the first thing that happens before you actually become the ambassador is your country, and every country does this, your country sends a letter to the leader of the other country and saying, we're going to put Joe Smith as our ambassador to your country. Please reply. And 99.9% of the time, the other leader says, if you want Joe Smith to be your ambassador, we will welcome him here. Once in a while, they say, we don't like Joe Smith. Find another ambassador. We just can't work with him. That doesn't happen very often because you don't want it to happen the other way either. Had Trump presented Masha Yovanovitch through agrément to Zelensky, he would have rejected her. It's clear from the phone call. He would have rejected her. So what was the question again?
Would career ambassadors have tamped this down sooner?
Oh, I know what I was going to say. Had Trump come out right after the brouhaha started and said, yes, I asked the military aid to be withheld. That's in my prerogative. I wanted corruption. And if Hunter Biden is involved in corruption, by God, he should be investigated too. The whole thing would have been over. It's like Watergate all over again.
Cover-up.
It's the cover-up. It's absolutely the cover-up.
Okay.
It's no different than Obama whispering to, Medvedev, I can be more flexible after the election. Okay, fine. You can be more flexible after the election.
Okay, here's my last question. And then while you're answering this, I'll look out. Second acts. I know that President Trump thinks that there's a second act for him. That's why he's running. Is there a second act for Ambassador Sondland? What are you doing now? And what are you going to do in 2024?
Well, I've been very blessed. I started a business 35 years ago that's essentially a real estate holding company that we have apartments, office buildings, shopping centers, and a chain of hotels. We sold our chain of hotels to a much larger company, and I'm now on the board of that company, and I'm involved in that. I'm also involved in a lot of philanthropy. I'm involved with the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, and we're about to start a large exhibition on Auschwitz to help educate young kids about what happened during the Holocaust, and also hopefully turn some Holocaust deniers around, showing them what really happened there, which is, I'm encouraging everyone to come to the Reagan Library and see this show. It's going to run for a year beginning in March. So I'm very busy with a lot of things. If I were asked to serve, depending on who the president was and whether I could support their foreign policy agenda, I'd be delighted to do it again.
You're going to vote for Trump?
No, I won't. I've been very public. As I said, up until January 5th, I could have supported Trump for another round. I think he's disqualified himself because of the way he handled the transfer of power. The Republican Party is very fortunate that there are 5, 6, 7 candidates, depending on how you count, all of whom I think could hit the ground running as president. I don't have a favorite right now. I'm looking hard at all of them, but we have a very good field of people, but I don't think Trump should be reelected.
Okay, I have Jake first.
Thank you so much for. In October, you said that the Biden administration had done the impossible in uniting NATO and the EU. Would your sentiment on that be the same now, especially after the latest action in delivering leopard tanks to Ukraine? What is your thoughts on the Biden's deal with Ukraine?
It's a very good question. I think I said they've done an impossible relating to the US and the EU, not NATO and the EU, US and the EU. I'm just so concerned about the delay and the dithering. It's taking too long every time a request comes over the transom. And this little skirmish with the Germans where they wanted us to show ours before they showed theirs. Again, while all of these conversations are going on, people are dying and infrastructure is crumbling, all of which is going to cost a lot more to fix. And of course, you can't bring back the dead. So I wish that we'd quit talking, realize we have to end this war and we have to end it decisively in favor of Ukraine. I don't believe that the Russians will escalate on a nuclear basis, and I'm willing to take that risk. And I think if we're not willing to take that risk, we have to rethink everything.
Meaning NATO, rethink NATO.
Rethink everything, because the Russians could always go nuclear for any reason. I think they're smart enough to understand what it would mean. Even popping off one tactical nuke would mean decimation, and they know that. So I think the minute you're scared of that kind of escalation, you've lost.
Okay, I've here next.
You spoke at length about how being a political appointee gives you some flexibility in terms of maneuvering around bureaucracy and how you've got the ability to do more things than maybe a career diplomat would. But I'm wondering if you found yourself in a position where sometimes the bureaucracy was a good thing. And if so, could you share an example of how some of those built-in institutions helped?
Yeah, look, nothing is black or white. And I worked with some incredible men and women who were permanent career servants. They were invaluable. In fact, I met a few that I thought had a very high degree of EQ as opposed to IQ. A lot of them have high IQ. Most of them have high IQ, or they wouldn't be there. But they don't have any EQ. They can't read the room. They would have never asked President Juncker to go into his office, and because they wouldn't have been able to read that, and it wouldn't have been part of the manual. Where they can be valuable is if you want to slow something down, you just let the bureaucracy handle it, and it will move like molasses.
Thank you so much for coming. I guess my question is, with much of the diplomatic focus right now on Ukraine, what issues are you most concerned about not getting addressed between the US and the EU?
Oh, China, without question.
Meaning what?
Well, we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think that right now we should be doing with Taiwan what we should have done with Ukraine, which was move a lot of material and a lot of people into Taiwan and just make it clear that we're going to brook no invasion of any kind. And we need to do that with our allies. There needs to be as many Europeans in Taiwan, as many Australians in Taiwan, as many Japanese in Taiwan. Everybody needs to be there. So the Chinese just know it's just not even on the table for conversation.
But isn't the German Chinese economic relationship, hasn't that shifted over the last year because of Ukraine in part?
Well, that's always a good question. The Germans and the French are always, they can't quite separate their economic interests from their security interests. And as a result, they were the ones that gave me and my job the biggest problems. The Germans with the energy dependence, they're hooked on Russian gas the way a drug addict is hooked on heroin. And the French could not separate themselves from Iran because they're doing some business with Iran. And I'm the one who was elected, you know, euphemistically chosen to deliver the message to the French that, look, if you want to do business with Iran, you can do business with Iran. If you want to do business with the United States, you can do business with us, but you can't do business with both. So pick one. And they were doing this much business with Iran, this much business with the United States, so it was an easy choice. But they don't make anything easy.
Here.
Thank you so much for being here. So my question would be, you spent a lot of time in the EU. You spoke about your encounter with Jean-Claude Juncker. And so did you have any other meeting that stood out to you during your time as ambassador? And also, what did you think of the environment in Brussels in general and the institution of the EU's when it came to negotiation?
Do you like the EU better now than you did before? Is another way to ask her question.
Well, I didn't know them before. I like the notion of the EU. I like what the EU experiment is supposed to be. Their bureaucracy is worse than ours. Plus, you have a situation where you need unanimity among all 27 members on most important things. Not even a qualified voting majority will do it. It needs to be unanimity. And just imagine, for example, that in order to pass a bill in the Senate or the House, you needed unanimity. I mean, even if you had overwhelming amount of Democrats or Republicans, depending on what you were trying to do, you still would never get unanimity. So it's a very, very difficult needle to thread. And I found, again, getting to the decision maker and getting to the people who hold the gavel was really, really helpful in moving certain policy agenda issues forward quickly. Because if you don't put the word quickly in the sentence, it doesn't matter. They have a philosophy, we be here when you be gone. And that's what they live by.
Here.
Well, as one of pre-Ukrainians at Duke, let me thank you a lot for tanks and for your help in Nord Stream 2 back, in EU. So almost 1 year ago, I was, as many Ukrainians didn't expect the war, and I kind of got realization of war on February 24th in the night when I heard explosions and missiles, and my dad called the war had begun. But you obviously been much longer, and you knew about Nord Stream 2, about the geopolitics of gas. So when did you sense the beginning of something that is not Crimea kind of scenario, not nice, but like real war? Thank you.
You mean after I left the ambassadorship?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Vladimir Putin's default setting, we all know what a default setting is. It's how, when the TV comes from the factory, it has settings already put in, and then if you want them different. His default setting is invade Ukraine. So it's not a question of, is he going to invade Ukraine? It's a question, when is he going to invade Ukraine? And he's also from what I have read about him, I've never met him. I've seen a lot of intelligence. Some of it actually pretty good. A lot of it is crap, but some of it is really good, depending on the source and method of collection. And what I get the sense is that he is a data collector, and he has what's called a spidey sense of what's going on, like a spider does. When Biden botched the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and there's no other way to describe it, not commenting on whether we should get out, we should get out. Not commenting on whether we should get out quickly, we should get out quickly, but not get out stupidly, which is what we did. So that was the first bit of data that Putin took note of. But the biggest thing Biden said, which really, to me, was the instigator of this invasion, was a comment, an innocuous comment he made to the effect, and I'm not quoting directly, to the effect of, we will not tolerate an incursion into Ukraine unless it's a small incursion, and then we'll deal with that. He said that. You can Google it, you can YouTube it. He said it. Putin heard that loud and clear and has been testing that ever since. Now, of course, he's in so deep, it is what it is.
Okay, last question
Thank
from Ruthie, and you may not get the mic in time, so just speak up.
Yeah. In hindsight, how do you view the Trump administration's tariff war with Europe? And what do you think the Biden administration could learn or unlearn from Trump's hard-nosed posture towards the bloc?
What was the, I missed the couple of words in the first part. What war with Europe?
Europe, Trump's trade.
Oh, trade war. Okay. Well, again, I understand the psychology of a real estate developer because that's what I am and was. And Trump didn't like to deal in abstracts, and he didn't like to deal in lengthy, protracted things. He wanted quick. So he was always looking for leverage, which is what you do in business with a competitor, customer, what have you. And it's not always an unfriendly thing. It's just what move can I make or what position can I take where the other side has to do something, where they can't just get up from the table and say, that was a very nice meeting, nice to meet you. We'll do this again sometime. We'll get back to you someday, which is the way we've been conducting foreign policy with the EU for decades under both parties. And Trump realized that the way you get people to do things immediately, like in a matter of hours, days, weeks, not decades, is you threaten them economically. And that's what he did. Can agree with it or disagree with it, but it works. So in the firsthand example that I experienced, Trump wanted to mitigate the trade deficit between the US and the EU, which was running at about 180 billion against us at the time. And there are a lot of economists will say, well, that's not really a trade deficit. It has to do with exchange rates and savings rates and all of this stuff. But the bottom line was, it's a lot easier for the Europeans to sell us their stuff than it is for us to sell the Europeans our stuff. It's just bottom line. And some of that, by the way, is because Europeans don't like to buy our stuff. They like their stuff better. So they buy less of our stuff than we buy of theirs. And you know what? That's our problem. If we make a car to export to Europe and the Europeans say, we don't want to drive that piece of shit. We like our own cars better. That's our problem. We shouldn't intervene in that. We should just do a better job making cars so that the customer wants them. But all of that aside, there still is a structural imbalance. And Trump asked nicely several times through me directly and through others, I want to address this. And the Europeans were used to dealing with other leaders, Obama, Bush, Clinton. And they said, okay, we'll talk about it. We understand. Yes, we'll have another meeting. And Trump said, no. I want this fixed now, not when I'm dead. And they said, well, it doesn't work that way. He said, great, 25% tariff on everything you export. And all of a sudden, okay, let's have a meeting. Because it would have put several of their industries out of business instantly. And of course, they're complaining to the press that he's a bad ally and so on and so forth. But they started talking.
So I encourage you all to get the book, The Envoy. I promise you it's the best book by an ambassador to the EU you've ever read. But it's also
Tony Gardner would probably take exception to that.
No, it's a fascinating book. It's a vivid book. As you can tell, he tells great anecdotes, and there's a lot more in the book. It would make a great movie. It'd probably have to be R-rated because of the language, but it captures well what you set out to do, what you want to do. And I have a sense that there will be a second chapter, and I'm fascinated to watch how that goes. In the meantime, I'm just so grateful that you came and shared this with us. Thank you for that.
Thanks for your warm hospitality. I appreciate it. Thank you.